Hey everybody, welcome to Office Hours. Welcome, welcome. I'm here with Dani Bell. Today we're getting pretty nerdy talking about SOPs and scaling your business. And Dani, I think I saw a session that you did on productized services, or it was sort of in that, there was an event I think that you did there where you...
Exactly. Yeah, there was like a productized day and I was talking all things SOPs.
And Notion, and I was like, yes, we need to talk about this. So we have a lot of people here who are excited about SOPs, a lot of replies that we got on Twitter too. So I know people are pretty excited here. I'd love to hear in the chat, who here is already using SOPs? And if so, are you already using Notion for your SOPs? Because I know lots of people were maybe using Google Docs or things like that before. So it's always cool to know, I guess, how would you rate yourself on your use of SOPs currently? I'd love to hear from you in the chat. So let us know where you're at. And also it's always fun to know what level people are at with Notion too. So there is a poll below. So let us know how long you've been using Notion. Looks like we have a lot of folks who are just getting started. And I think SOPs are actually one of the best places for teams to get started with Notion. I think it's probably the most easy to use case versus say something like task management, which is super fun and great to do in Notion, but it adds a lot of complexity. But SOPs, I think, are one of just the great starting points. And I'd be curious if you agree with that as well.
Yeah, so I think actually that's, I'm seeing a lot of people here in the comments say that they're just getting started with SOPs. And one of the things that I've noticed, a lot of people often ask me, and it also came up on Twitter yesterday when you mentioned about this topic, is a lot of people said, I'm only like me and one other person, surely it's just overkill. And that's exactly how I felt. And I think the key message actually that I would give to anybody who's just thinking about starting out with building some kind of systematic way of doing stuff is that it's never too early. And that actually what you'll find is that the earlier you start, the easier and quicker you'll be able to scale. With my own business, Scribbly, which is a productized content service, for a long time I was running it with a very, very, very tiny team. And I was doing a lot of the kind of core work and everything was in my head. And I was like, but that's fine, right? Because I know how to do everything and everything is functional. But the minute I wanted to scale and the minute I wanted, and not just wanted actually, but needed to grow the team because I needed time off and I was burning out and it was all getting too much for one person to handle. It was a long process of retrospectively going back and thinking, okay, everything that's super obvious to me, how do I make that explicitly clear and obvious for a total pair of fresh eyes? I think the earlier you can really factor this in as a priority, the absolute better you'll be able to make your whole SOP ecosystem. So I'll walk you through a little bit about kind of how I've approached it at Scribbly today. But I think the other key message is that there's no right or wrong way of doing it. I think maybe a lot of people feel overwhelmed or a bit, a bit nervous to get started. Like, oh, I'm probably just not doing it right. But actually, as long as it communicates something, then it's perfect. So, and you'll keep working on it. So it's, don't be afraid to get started and don't feel like it's too early to get started.
And also, again, that work in progress, right? It's always good to have a starting point, but you're going to tweak them as you go because your systems will change as you go, your tools will change. And so just knowing that it's a work in progress. Yeah. I know Gray was asking, are we talking about SOPs for using Notion or SOPs for businesses that are kept in Notion? So we're talking about SOPs for any businesses, but the SOPs are kept in Notion. It's not for using Notion. Exactly. Although I'm curious, if you're sharing these SOPs with other team members or you're starting to onboard new team members, do you ever have any difficulty getting those new team members to get familiar with Notion, or do you find the SOPs are kind of easy enough to navigate within Notion that it hasn't been an issue?
I think the actual usability thing is really intuitive. So people get it really kind of quickly when they first see Notion, they understand how to work with it. I think the core thing that I struggle with is actually getting people to remember that information is there, that there is this place that's constantly evolving and constantly being updated that they should go and reference. And because so I use Notion every day, and the core team at Scribbly uses Notion every single day. But if you're a bit more of a peripheral person that we work with, it can be, this forgotten resource. So often I think the learning curve is reminding people like, okay, don't forget, every time you have a question, like first definitely check we call it the operations hub. Definitely check if it's there, because 9 times out of 10 it will be, and if it's not, then it should be, because your questions are super valid. So yeah, that's more the learning curve I think that I've personally found is the most challenging.
And it sounds like also you're recommending, even if you think you plan to stay solo, it's good to just get that stuff documented anyway, because you just never know when you might need a little extra support.
Definitely. And even if you want to keep your business very small, if you ever want to, I think what I've learned with Scribbly anyway is the core to running a really healthy, profitable, for me, I wanted a scalable business. That might not be your number one objective, but to have a functioning business that isn't too stressful, you need to have repeatable processes or defined processes that are, they're not so changeable from one time to the next. So how you do sales or how you do customer onboarding, these things should be pretty typical from one person to the next. The more you can bed that mindset in from the beginning, even if you only ever plan to be one person, I think the less stressful it becomes to run a business. Yes. And certainly from my own experience of doing the exact opposite of that and kind of like customing everything every time for about 18 months, I really quickly burn out. And then it takes a long time to build yourself back up from that place where you've like, okay, well, I'm really tired. Everything feels just too difficult to hand over because it's all in my head and I've been doing it differently every time anyway. So how do I even claw back from here? Yeah. And I think if I was ever to start a business from scratch again, I'd just really prioritize having that repeatability, clearly communicated processes as a like fundament of any, like the fundamental building block of any new business.
So where should we begin then? Let's say people are very brand new in their SOPs journey. What is the next best step?
Sorry, say that again. I was just reading in the comments.
Yeah. I'm
Stop
like really
Gray. Sorry, say that again.
So I'm curious for people that are like totally brand new to SOPs, whether they are like a 1 or 2 person team, what is the best next step? I'm curious, like what are some of the tools that you use? Where do we start? Do we just open up a Notion page and begin? Where do we start?
Okay, great shout. Great question. So I think for me, the thing that I found most helpful was to spend like quite a lot of time. So a good day or two, just which for me felt like a lot of time because that was time I wasn't working. So basically doing a massive brain dump of all of the things that you know are absolutely critical to your business function. So you can split them up into broad categories, like for marketing, what are the core things that absolutely have to happen in order for this business to run? For sales, how does that happen? And what would anybody need to know if for whatever reason they have to step in because I am, well, like, for example, I was getting married last year and I was like, how do I like not just shut down the business? So basically categorizing, I created 5 kind of top categories of things that were really fundamental to the business. And they ended up for me being like operational stuff. In the context of Scribbly, that's things like, how do I assign articles? Which writers work on which clients? What's the general turnaround time for things? How do you create a great brief? All of these different things that are super important to make sure that quality stays consistent. Then there were things like sales. So when a lead comes in, how do you convert that lead? What happens to them? Where do they, what touch points should they have? When should they get emails? Where do those emails live? All of these different, and if those emails don't live anywhere, where might they live? So it really helps you to start unpicking like some black holes that you're like, I think lead nurturing is a really good example of that, where you'll be like, okay, well, maybe typically or historically leads have come into your pipeline, however that might be, and you've just created like a custom email for every single person, which is fine when maybe you're having a couple of leads a week or maybe a couple of leads a month or whatever. The minute you start having a couple of leads a day, maybe more, that needs to be much quicker. And so you'll start to very sort of obviously see, okay, this is going to be a blocker, so I should probably prioritize that. So yeah, for me, I really spent a lot of time going deep into the various areas of the business. And once I had this big backlog of stuff that I was like, okay, I need to write down how all of these things work. I then organized those in terms of like the most business critical. So I was going on, I was going to get married. So I knew that there were certain things that only I could do that absolutely needed to be handled by someone else. So for me, those were the most business critical things at that time. And then once I'd kind of got those out of the way, I could then work my way through gradually the other stuff. And it's a process. It takes time. Yeah. You keep updating them all the time because your business is organic. It's a moving, living thing. You're constantly going to need to update that the way that you do stuff. So yeah, I think basically just start with a very simple pen and paper exercise of getting everything out of your head. From there, prioritize. From there, do the really business critical stuff. And from there, then plan out how you're going to fit the rest in over the next, could be 6 months, could be year, could be, week if it's super important. Yeah.
And I saw somebody was asking SOPs. I know we like jumped into SOPs, but we're talking about standard operating procedures. If you're not familiar with SOPs, and yeah, you could think about it as like a user guide, just like you would, buy a computer and you've got a guide or like a software guide, but it's sort of that for your business, right? It's like an instruction guide for your business. Yeah, amazing. Okay, so do you want to jump in to show us your operations hub and maybe kind of what it has evolved into today and kind of how you think about it?
Yeah, sure.
Awesome. Focus on your screen. Cool. Yeah, and feel free to kind of take it in whatever direction you like. If you want to point out any of the tools that have helped you along the way, or any of the parts that you think are just great takeaways for people to know when they're thinking about their own SOPs.
Okay, yeah, sure. So I think just I'll go for a very quick overview first to show you the way that my hub, knowledge hub, whatever you want to call it, is structured. So the page kind of it should effectively be like a Wikipedia of all of the interrelated bits of information that anyone might need to know. So it moves through very high level stuff like the company, who are we, who do we work with, where can you find samples of the stuff that we've done when clients or prospective clients ask for it. There's things here around how to find which tools we use for different things and then how to log into them. There's clearly defined explanations about roles and responsibilities for when new people join the team, and also just to make sure that that's documented, because I think that's important. Then I'd say like the biggest sort of bulk of information in terms of well, I just call them how-tos. These are the sort of like practical guides of, like you say, an instruction manual type stuff. And these I'll walk you through different types of documentation that exist in this ecosystem, but the how-tos are what I would call a step-by-step walkthrough of a very specific task. And then we have things that are more like, I would say, macro type information. So generally, how does sales work at Scribbly? How do we talk about different types of leads? Where do they come into our CRM, and how are they then processed? Like all of this stuff that is not like you. Then there are, for example, I mentioned something about templates or email sequences and stuff, like making sure that it's super clear what those are called, where they're found, which one you should use and when. again, this is like super menial to outline that, but really important once you start to get a sales support function into the team. So yeah, there's things like customer support, and then just a general section like if someone goes on holiday, how you handle handovers. So within that, I would say there are three main types of ways that information is documented. I'll take a simple one to begin with. So this how-to section is mainly made up of step-by-step guides, which are literally like, walkthroughs, a screenshot and a very clear instruction, like do this, it should look like this, and, can kind of go through each of these processes. I think the important thing here is that the way that it's structured is designed to link to any related pages that are relevant. So for example, here I'm linking to the content plan because that's where the blog posts that will be uploaded to Webflow are housed, or at least they should be. And if, that's the sort of like source of truth. And then there are lots of things that seem really obvious once you've been doing it for a while, but that are not obvious if you're doing this for the first time. So you can add in all of these little reminders for each step, so that there's nothing that's left implicit, but rather explicitly stated, make sure you do this. And then at the end of the sort of guide here, I've got a final checklist so that people can go through the process and then at the end just run through what they've done and make sure that the key things are factored in. So I'd say like a good proportion of the Knowledge Hub is in this format, this very simple step-by-step guide. Here you can see that we have some kind of higher level information about the process that I think would be relevant. And actually, this is a really good example. So I probably haven't updated this for quite some time, and this is now out of date, this last sentence here. So this is a really good example of how you always need to go back and just make sure, has anything changed about this process since this was written? Because almost certainly it will have done.
One thing you might want to consider too is sometimes just using the @now timestamp. So sometimes I'll just say last updated @ and just kind of include that timestamp. So you can always do @today or @now if you ever just want to kind of add those quick timestamps.
That's such a great tip, and I think definitely. And then you can have a process around how you update your SOPs, right? Where every
Inception.
5 weeks go in and check on those pages, so you can
like you build it into your weekly routine or your tasks, right? Yeah, you've already inspired, like my assistant's here too, and it's like, wow, that's so beautiful. She's like already adding it as a task for herself. Love it. And I love how beautiful and like visual those pages are. It's so easy to follow. You don't have to be technical. I know we use a lot of video, like Loom videos in our SOPs, but I like just how simply that is laid out. Big copy, big images.
And really, can you say it in a sentence or less? And if not, then break it out into 2 steps. Because actually, I'll move on to the Loom example now. So I'm actually about to go on maternity leave in a week. So there's been all of a sudden like a flurry of stuff that I've realized isn't documented and needs to be, and I've needed to do it quite quickly. So I've started to create video guides as opposed to, oh no, this is not one of them. Let me find one.
It's always the tricky one to remember. You're like, which one is safe to show?
I know. No, well, and also I think a lot of it, because most of them are, here we go, this is one. So yeah, basically my team are taking on a lot of stuff that I've been doing. And so instead of doing a step-by-step guide, they were like, it would actually be really helpful if I could just walk through doing it with you. So what I did was just started to record me doing these tasks where, I'm responding to for example, in this case, how to create a custom quote, and you know, kind of going step by step in perhaps more detail than I might do if I was just doing it for my own sake. Every part of that process. And the team really like that. I think when you, one thing I think that's quite a good way of thinking about how to pick which type of method and when is, videos are amazing when it's like the first time you've ever done something, because you probably want to be guided through. You've got the time to sort of like, okay, I'm just going to sit and do this as I'm watching this video. Whenever you need to kind of have a quick reminder of something, those step-by-step guides can be really helpful, because it's like, okay, I know how to do up to sort of like halfway through this process and then I've forgotten. And rather than scrubbing through a video, you can just quickly pinpoint a part in a visual guide instead. So I think there's definitely room for different types of ways of documenting information within the same ecosystem. And to be honest, sometimes you just need to create some kind of documentation really, really quickly, and then just make a video, because it is probably quicker. And then you can go back at some point and update it.
A couple questions have popped in. I don't know if it makes sense to mention it now, or if you want to like save them to the end.
Yeah, let me walk you through the very last type of SAP, and then we can go back through the questions, because it might, maybe some of it will be
clarified. Yeah, awesome.
So I talked a bit about that, those kind of high level pages, which are they are SOPs, but they're definitely more, I would say, theoretical approaches, or like this, just, you know, you can do sales in 1,000 different ways and no way is right or wrong, really. This is just how we do it at Scribbly. And I think like a core thing that I've tried to do in all of our SOPs is make sure that they're really tight and really to the point, concise. So where possible, splitting out in one very large topic into many pages that are obviously all linked together. And now I love in the new update of Notion that you have that breadcrumb type thing where you can see, okay, this links to this very clearly. So just to give you an example, like the sales process landing page, if we call it that, looks like this, where we go through, okay, here you're going to find out about inbound, outbound, there's a daily routine, there's some other information that's also sort of really relevant if you're in a sales role, and then just general, like, make sure you do this type stuff. And then let's have a look at daily routine. That's probably a good one. So you can see here where I've tried to break down all of the information that's in the how we do things into tangible every single day. Make sure you follow these steps and why you're doing them, because I think that's also really important. We can also go back and have a look. Let's see the inbound sales process. So here, these are mostly things like definitions. So when we talk about leads, for example, that's defined as this, a contact is defined as this, and a deal is defined as this. And, you know, that's quite important, because they might, certain people might think about things differently. So you need to be super explicit about that. Then general high level information, like, where does this information come from? Like, what exists on Scribbly's website, in the back end, in the sort of setup that you're actually engaging with as a salesperson. And I think that's also really a really important thing that's factored into my way of doing SOPs is everything is visible to everybody, because I think it's really important that the whole team has total visibility about all parts of the business, and that they understand how what they do fits into other stuff. So for example, they might be answering live chat leads, let's say. They can see by going into this Notion space how that might impact something that the salesperson is doing. And similarly, the salesperson will need to know, okay, well, once let's say they've sold a trial post, how do they work with the rest of the team to convert that trial to subscription? So like everything is all interconnected all the time. And so your information, your SOPs should be as well. And I think that's one of the amazing things about using something like Notion versus Google Docs, for example. You can create those hyperlinks between pieces of information that support one another. So why don't we now, let's perhaps go back to some of those questions.
Edwell was asking, maybe I'm not familiar with the language, but can someone explain what a lead means?
Yeah, so that's a really good example of, why it's so important to define everything. So in my context, in the context of Scribbly, a lead is somebody who could become a customer. So they have submitted some kind of interest in the business. They might have booked a call or sent in a request for a quote. So we define that as a lead. And then we take that lead through a process to try and make them a customer. But it's a really good question, and it's a really good example of how what you might consider something, or how you might define something, might be different to me. So it needs to be in black and white what the rule book is for this business in particular.
Love that. Yeah, and I love that comment about just being more explicit than you think you need to be, that you're not using kind of industry jargon. I like to think of it as if I were to drop a total stranger inside of my Notion space, could they reasonably probably guess where to go next, right? So just making it as clear as possible. So that's great. Okay, so some of the questions that popped in, do you include policy and procedures here as well, or do you put that in a separate area, or is your SOP your policies and procedures?
Everything that you would need to know in order to kind of handle anything that would come up within policies. Procedures definitely is covered in the normal setup. Anything to do with policy, like what's our policy on refunds, things like that, should all be captured there. There's likely to be a lot of things that aren't, and the only reason that might be the case is if we we're a bit more flexible on those. So let's say, for example, something to do with customer support. For example, do we give refunds for certain things? One of the things that's really important to me in running the business is that the team feels ownership to make the right decision based on the specific context. So in those instances, I try not to document too much because I want them to have the flexibility to use their intuition and just to do what they think is right. I only document things that I think are really important. Like if you did it differently, it would probably break other stuff. So that's one way that I approach it, but it might not be the way that makes sense for your business.
One of the questions I had was, I noticed in a few instances the pages were locked, and I'm curious, how empowered are the other team members to make edits to the SOPs, or is there someone who is the documentarian role?
Yeah.
How does that work?
That's a really good point. So initially I created everything. And then now what we've sort of got to is there are different owners for different parts of the Notion space. So there we have, for example, a head of content is responsible for making sure that all of the information about our writers, our writing samples, the client tone of voice, all of that stuff, they need to be updating that really regularly. I don't touch it. The only reason I might lock something like the sales, a lot of the sales stuff is locked at the moment purely because we've only just brought someone into that role, and they're new to Notion, new to how all of this works. And I think it's kind of important to have a little bit of control over. You've put a lot of effort into building out this information hub, making sure that things don't get kind of deleted or moved around, or you can see I'm a bit of a stickler for columns
formatting and
organization. Yeah, it's really easy to break it, so I try and keep certain things a bit controlled as well.
That's fair. No, that's great to know. Another question came in. Do you schedule for regular updates to the SOP pages? And if so, how do you decide how often? I know we sort of touched on that a little bit, you could build that into your routine. How often would you say you actually update your SOPs?
Well, So for the things that are really, certain parts of the SOP will change very rapidly, like the stuff that I mentioned before that the head of content is responsible for in terms of the writers, the clients, anything to do with the day-to-day running of stuff. I ask her to make sure she dedicates a bit of time every week just to make sure any changes are reflected, because any longer than that, it does start to get a bit unmanageable. But otherwise, the other big parts, you know, like the sales process, that's not really going to change much ever. So it's only if I was to make a big fundamental kind of change from HubSpot to something else that I would then go back and review that in depth. And otherwise, I just take maybe an hour or two a month going through the areas that I think are likely to have some inconsistencies creep in, and just make those small tweaks.
Awesome. Yeah, I think like you were saying, it's the sort of thing where it takes a bit of time up front while you're kind of getting these initially set up, and then it can be a bit of maintenance moving forward. So if you can take that time, that day or two, have a little business retreat with yourself and kind of
Exactly.
get your other team members to help you as well, right? Like if some team members are super savvy with certain areas of the business, having each team member kind of help build that up over time.
Definitely.
How do you change the owner and permissions? Is this in the corporate/enterprise version? I'll let you share that first if you want.
Yeah, we do it really informally, in the sense of I just tell someone you're now the owner of this. There's probably a much smarter way of doing it, but Scribbly has a really small core team, so I think any bigger than, so we're now 3 people, well actually now 4 people on the core team plus a part-time assistant. So I think any bigger than that, you'd probably want to start having a bit more formal processes. And if you're a huge company using Notion, then you definitely would. So, but so I'll let you answer like the actual answer to that question.
No, that's great. That's great. Just good for people to know, if you do have the team version, you can use groups. So if you have almost different departments, you can scope different pages to different groups. So you could say, oh, I only want the administrators to have access to this, or the VIP team members, or the full-time or part-time. Like you could kind of break up different groups in different ways. And then in the sharing settings at the top of your pages, you can say, just share this page with these folks, give them editing permission or just viewing permission. So you have some flexibility if you've already got a team plan to like get a little bit more granular with the like who can comment, who can view, and who can edit those pages. So just something to be aware of. That's great. And then the other question that came in was, I see some things in separate places, for example, visual assets in company, and I would guess down in assets. Is there a rubric for determining when, if to repeat a link in a category?
So the general logic that I use is different team members will probably use 1, maybe 2 of the columns that you see here. If there are pieces of information that are relevant for multiple members of the team, I will repeat it. So you'll see, well, you can see here, like converting customers from trials to subscriptions. That's also going to be reflected in the role up here is going to be in the page actually of who is responsible for doing that. Similarly, if there's, like you say, the assets, if there are different people with different kind of goals in mind who are going to need access to that and who are usually looking at a certain part of this page, I'll just repeat the information just to make sure it's super clear, because like I said, you'd be surprised just how easily information can be lost here, because there's a lot and it can be a bit overwhelming. So you want to make it as obvious and clear, even if that means repeating the same thing in different spaces.
Yeah, I think a good point that you bring up is that, you know, you can mention and you can link to other pages in multiple places. So you can have that link living in 10 different pages if you need it to. And it's with the backlinks, it's kind of easy to jump around and kind of see which other pages are linked. So in a way, the data doesn't have to only live in one place or only one category. So I like that. That's funny. I need all this stuff she's showing. Don't worry, Craig, I got you covered. We've got an SOPs specific Notion training coming up. That's
nice.
awesome.
And actually, I should say that the original idea for organizing the content like this came from a Notion template that I found a long time ago, which I'm sure must still exist. So if you want to get started with creating something that looks visually similar, there's definitely a template to help you do that. And then you'll just figure out how to make it fit your, your needs.
Yeah, definitely. Are there any, I'm always curious about the content processes. I'm curious if there's any of that you're open to sharing, kind of what your process looks behind the scenes. I ask that kind of selfishly because I feel like the content part is the part that is like the least documented in my own space. I'm curious, are you open to sharing?
Actually creating the content?
Yeah, any of your like processes, routines around that. I'm just curious.
Yeah, let's see. So we can, I can talk you through, okay, so we have all kinds of, so just to walk you through what Scribbly is, Scribbly offers monthly content marketing packages. So that includes everything from creating a content plan based on keyword research, competitor analysis, all of those really important things. Creating from that research, building out a backlog of topics that we think you should be working on that month that have the most impact and actually are worth investing in. And then obviously getting that content produced and then managing your sort of any ad hoc projects that might come up in your marketing plan. So let's say you might be running a campaign and need an ebook and a landing page or something to support that. So we can support with those activities. So within that, there's a lot of different people who do different parts of that process. I can walk you through, for example, here, this keyword research is a big part of what we do in terms of how we define stuff, like how we define the topics that we think are important for you. But obviously, every business will have their own unique way of doing keyword research, and there is really no right or wrong way of doing, as long as obviously you're using the right tools and you're getting the right information. If your process is slightly different from one business to the next, it doesn't really matter. What matters is the end result. So we found it was really important to solidify our process here at Scribbly. So first things, there's a guide on like how to use the tool that we use, which is Keyword Finder, and then we walk through the process of how to actually do keyword research using this tool. And the idea of this is that, it's very much like, again, this step-by-step guide of what you're seeing in the tool that you're using and how you need to be working with that information. Because even if you're an SEO expert, the tools vary greatly in terms of their complexity and in terms of just general usability. So we wanted to make it super obvious for anybody coming in, even if you're like an external consultant, freelancer, how to use our methodology and our tool stack. So we walk through the how to do keyword research a la Scribbly style, step by step there. And then the next step of that is, okay, and we've got here like how to do keyword research for free, which is things like looking on forums and Quora, stuff like that. If for whatever reason you need to bulk up the information you already have, then we go through, okay, you've got your keywords. How do you then define what it is that you need to be focusing on? And again, every business will have a different way of doing that. So we thought it was really important to solidify our methodology here. Again, all of it is very industry standard, but written out as if you've never encountered anything to do with keyword research before. Because the idea is, with everything that lives in this whole space, is that an absolute layman should be able to do any part of the business. So we really go into depth on every single aspect.
I love that.
And then, so that's one part. And then we have things that are a bit more practical, like, for example, how to assign articles to writers. Now, this is actually, interestingly, an area that is quite out of date, because we use we use Airtable for our content assignments. I mean, gosh, it's changed a huge amount since visually the setup in Airtable has changed massively since then. But the idea here is that, so when I first brought the first full-time person in, I wanted to make sure that it was really clear to her exactly, like, not just, I mean, Airtable is basically just a database, right? So you need to know what am I adding in here and why, and then how do I relate to that information? So that's basically kind of outlined here. And you can see here that it links to the head of content role, because that's the person who's responsible for it.
Great question that just popped in was, why Airtable when you could set up a table in Notion for this?
I think there's a couple of reasons. First is cost. So we have all of our writers are in Airtable, and there are lots of them, and we can have them in Airtable for free. And in Notion, it's obviously, there's a cost per head. So there's a sort of big cost factor. And there's also the fact that within Airtable, it was very, very easy to set up a lot of automations that are, we work with a number of different tools. Like, for example, when a field is created in Airtable, it will automatically generate a document in Google Drive with the name of that assignment, and it will archive that document in the right client folder, and or create a client folder if one doesn't exist. It will set the right permissions on the document. All of these automations happen in the background, and those were very, very easy. Well, they weren't actually very easy, but they were doable with Zapier's natural integration with HubSpot, with Airtable, sorry. And perhaps now, when I first started using Notion, when it was really new, so perhaps now there's tons more potential and like things that you can do easily with Notion and automations. But at the time, it was quite closed. So that was the main reason. And then once you sort of set up your ecosystem somewhere else, like all of our project management is in Airtable and everything is set up there. So it would be quite a big task for us to move to something new.
I can understand that. It's like when the system is working and there isn't friction, like you got everyone on the same page, it's great. You're like, how much do I, while I'm about to go on maternity leave, make a big change in our processes?
Yeah. And get everyone to learn a new tool.
Yeah, I can understand that. Craig was asking, can you show your workflow for this? Is that something you're able to show?
The thing that I've just described.
Yeah, Craig, is there
Airtable?
Yeah, Craig, let me know if there's a specific part of that you want to see, because I know Craig maybe has some similar issues. Like, I think he's got writers, and I know he's managing different writers in Notion. And something for people to be aware of too is you can get pretty far inviting people in as guests as well, and not actually paying for additional members. So that is something to think about if you have freelancers that are you want to share parts of your Notion space. There are lots of ways to kind of like get around that cost. Sorry, Notion.
Definitely.
But I totally get that. Yeah, once your systems are set up, and until Notion's API is ready and we can do some of those automations, some of that has to be a little bit more manual, or you'd have to build out your templates to be rock solid, which it takes a bit of time. So I get that.
So I'm just, you can't, I think you can only see my Notion thing right now. So let me just, I'm just creating a, obviously, if in Airtable you can see all of our clients, right? So I'm just creating like a
safe view.
A safe view. Let's go.
Yeah, Gray said, use Notion to do things, don't do things to use Notion. That's a great, says a guy who's guilty of doing things so that he can use Notion. It's like, I wonder what this could do. I wonder if I could.
Yeah.
That's funny. Oh, placing bets. Which comes first, the end of the pandemic or the Notion API? Ouch.
Oh,
oh sad. Come on,
okay,
Notion.
right. I'm just going to go to Well, now I need to know my alphabet.
I know we're like putting you on the spot here. Like, show us your stuff. And then we had another question pop in that we can address. If anyone has any other questions, feel free to add them to the Ask a Question area below. And I'm curious if you're inspired. Like, I know I'm inspired to go clean up my pages for sure.
Sorry, I am.
No
I'm
worries,
just trying to get my. I just want to show you stuff that's not basically everything.
Yeah.
Like in a possible way.
I know it's the hardest part of just making sure that your views are, appropriate,
right,
not sharing too much.
Because it's you can't really see too much. So how can I'm going to stop sharing this tab and I'm just going to start sharing a different one.
Awesome.
Chrome tab. All right, so the normal view of Airtable is quite pretty. We normally have it organized by client and with lots of different views based on who you are. But I've just come into the full list because it's the most anonymous one. But what you can see here is if I so I'm going to write test article with a great title. And I'm going to assign that to the client new test. And what will happen now, through the power of Zapier and other things that I don't really understand, is, and I'm going to just set this as needs assigning. Actually, no, I'm not, because then you're not going to be able to see it. You can see now in that last, oh, where did that just go? Oh, did I just... I knew I shouldn't have changed it. I'm going to do it again. There we go. It's back. So what's happened in the background now, or what will happen shortly, is that a Google Doc will appear here. I'm going to do another one with that view, that in view, so you can see it happen. Just going to scroll over like this. And yeah, you can see now these Google Doc Drive links are appearing. And if I click into that Google Doc, again, through the power of Zapier, it's given the article that title, and it's also changed the sharing permissions of the doc, which are automatically, when you're in a business, you have a business account, it's set to be just viewable to you or to your company. So we've changed it so that anyone with the link can edit. And that was a manual process that someone literally did at the beginning of Scribbly. They would go through every time, create a Google Drive link, a Google Doc link, and they would manually change the sharing permissions. I was paying like a VA to do that. And now a lot of processes like that have been automated to make the team as streamlined as possible. So we have a very small team that can do a great amount of stuff because a lot of things are just powered through other tools. So yeah, sorry, that's not really Notion specific, but a really good way of, Notion is like one really important part of a big ecosystem, but without Notion, I don't know that any of it would really work. So it's really important. It's, I'd say, like the core of everything.
The spine. Yeah, that's amazing. I love it. I'm inspired to clean up my space. But is there anything else that you want to leave folks with or dig into? Or does anyone else have any specific questions either related to SOPs and Notion? I think we have one more question that just popped up. Do you use a text evaluator to aim for the specific grade level of understanding for the reading, since the goal is anyone could read it?
No, we just try and keep it really
Don't
simple.
overthink it, just keep it simple.
Yeah, if you just write, we basically just say try and write in one sentence or less, and that usually, usually does the trick.
Awesome. Yeah, any other folks have any questions? Was there anything that you wanted to address?
I'd say the only thing is just, just the hardest part is getting started. So
Yeah.
take some time to just begin the process of building out your operations hub, and the rest will follow. Like operations hub, you might call yours something completely different, but it's daunting to get started. But once you have it, it definitely does take on its own momentum, and try and hand over as much as you can to other people who are responsible for different areas, and encourage. I think you have to do a lot initially to encourage use of Notion, but once it becomes a cultural norm, then people are like, I don't know how would we run a remote business without it? Like, what would we do?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Where do you see? Oh, that's a great question from Natasha. Where do you see limits for your business with Notion?
It's a good question. I'm actually not sure. I think because a lot of the processes we do is, or the processes that documented as service-based processes, they're quite easy to document. I think if I ever ended up having anything that was particularly like technical, maybe it might not be the right platform for that, or if it relied on any, what we have housed here is quite simple here. It's simple, really. It's like images, text, videos, interlinking pieces of information. If your SOPs relied on something that needed to be more complex than that, maybe it wouldn't be the best. I don't know. Maybe it would be a great solution. I've just never, had to sort of think through that process. But yeah, so I guess that's probably the only thing I can think of.
That's great. Yeah, great. Was it Gray that was asking? Oh, Craig was asking, is there a book on SOPs? I mean, there's lots of great books. Like Clockwork is a really great one by Mike Michalowicz. Natasha just shared The E-Myth Revisited. Work the System by Sam Carpenter is amazing. But I'd be curious, are there books that kind of influenced you and made you realize like, everything's on fire, like SOPs is the thing that I need? What was it for you that kind of helped you figure this process out?
I can't take much credit for it because I haven't actually read it, or I can't even remember the title of it. But my husband read a book by an astronaut who was talking about lists, or maybe he was a surgeon. Anyway, surgeon. And he was talking about lists and the power of lists, and how you can basically make any complex process really simple by just writing a list. If somebody can follow step by step, there's really nothing that you can kind of forget if that's super clearly defined. And you see, like, even now astronauts going to space with a checklist, and I think that really got me thinking of like, okay, I think my business is really complicated, but it's actually really not. Like, you just need to break it down into, yes, checklist manifesto, amazing, thank you. Yeah, as long as you can create simple instructions out of complex information or complex processes, then you're onto a winner.
Love that. Yeah, Gray was saying a lot of ours is spatial, packing and shipping. We're trying to find ways to integrate video and images into our Notion SOPs. I mean, what's amazing is just the Loom integration too, of just being able to copy paste a Loom video and embed super quickly. So Loom is an amazing tool for getting those SOPs in place. I've been using Whimsical as well, which you can use Whimsical or Mural or Miro. There's lots of great options there, but to kind of map out workflows as well. So I like to kind of have the workflow. I'll copy the image from Whimsical and embed the Whimsical board, and then I have the step-by-step instructions below. You could also then put a Loom video in there and just kind of have a mix of those different medias, like you were saying, that some people prefer to read, some people want to watch the video, and just giving people options.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think that would actually be the next step, I think, for Scribbly's space, is to map out workflows and how different things fit together, so that, nothing is left to assumption.
Guesswork. Yeah. Amazing. Yeah, great book recommendations there in the sidebar. Amazing. Yeah, well, thank you so much for your generosity and sharing your space and sharing what you've learned. What would be, like, do you ever talk about this elsewhere on the internet? Because I know, again, your main business is, like the content side of things, but I know you've done presentations about this as well. Are there other places that people could find you online, or that you talk about SOPs? And
so I can share actually in the link in the comments, sorry, a link to a presentation I gave. It was a while ago now, so the information that's in Notion is much lighter than it is now. I think this is the right one. It's a short, yeah, it's a short presentation on the importance of creating clear and consistent processes and how that's so important to creating a scalable business. Otherwise, I think I'm really, really passionate about the no-code space. I've never created or done anything entrepreneurial before now, and I always saw technology as a big barrier to entry because I'm not a particularly I am technically minded, like I understand tech, but I'm not a developer, and it just seemed like, okay, maybe I need loads of money or loads of time or whatever to start something. And actually what the no code movement has sort of enabled me to do is become an entrepreneur using tools and knowledge I have that are really readily available and intuitive. So you can see me talking on places like I gave a talk on at the Webflow they did a virtual summit recently. I was talking there. I've also kind of done some stuff, some blog posts about with Webflow on how I started a business with like no money and in very little time. So if I tend to share a lot of this stuff on my Twitter, which is Danny_Scribbly. So you can have a look there if there's anything interesting, or just reach out to me and I can answer any questions you might have.
Amazing. I'll drop your profile there in the chat as well. Yeah, thank you so much. This was super helpful. I think that original video that you shared must have been the one that I watched originally, and knew that, yeah, we had to get you one office hour. So I'd love to hear from folks here. You know, was this helpful? Was this useful? Are you going to be working on your SOPs this weekend? Hopefully, even if you're a team of one or two, I hope that you're inspired to just think about SOPs as an opportunity to like you're doing it before you're ready for it. And I think that's going to be the easiest way to approach it, right? Make it before you think you need it. Exactly.
And if for whatever, I don't, you know, I'm sure there's all kinds of amazing businesses in this group of people. So if your ambition is at some point to sell that business, one thing I've been told over and over again is you need to have this documentation like crystal clear, because without that, it is just information in your head. Somebody needs to understand how this business works without having ever interacted with it. So even if you're one person, but your 10, 15-year ambition is maybe to sell it, scale it to something that exists beyond you, just start now. There's no harm in doing it.
Love that. Mark was asking, if you were starting again, what 3 things would you do differently? Great question.
Start creating documentation from the very, very beginning, and test the documentation with people. So I have a habit of just like creating stuff and being like, okay, I've done that now, but I should probably like, you know, put it in front of someone and be like, work through this process and let me know if it's good or not. And, you know, if it's clear. And hand over documentation earlier. Like, you don't need to be a blocker. Just give it to the people who are responsible for that area and let them be the responsible person for it.
One question I'd love to ask you, I feel like there's kind of 2 schools of thought about this. One is that trying to make yourself as indispensable as possible at a company so that if you left, there'd be like this giant gaping hole. But I feel like they kind of switching a little bit so that you're almost making it so that you're able to step further away and really reduce your value to like just the things that really only you can do. And I think there's actually a smaller amount of that than we think. Like there's so much of what we're kind of doing intuitively and that we think like, oh, only I could be the one to ever do that at a company. So one feels like it keeps you in a job and the other feels like, oh, I can actually step away from this and grow beyond my business and have other people helping me behind the scenes.
I think key to scaling a business is to make yourself completely replaceable. Like you will always be a blocker if there are only things that you can do. So if your ambition is to grow, you know, like a huge company, you need to be thinking, okay, what would someone need to be able to do in order to do every part of my job? I kind of had that mindset for a very different set of reasons. Like I wanted, when I started my own thing, it was really important to me to have my own like a really, really good work-life balance. Like I didn't want to be working like crazy. I wanted to be able to have a business that could function without me, that I could dip in and out of, and sort of like earn, money that was enough for my lifestyle, but it wasn't like all consuming. To get there takes a little bit of time, but once you are at that point, it's really liberating. And then, but you have to make yourself replaceable. And the only way of doing that is to really sort of like, it's hard, but to take your ego in some respects out of the picture and be like, I know that I think that I can do this the best of everyone in the whole world, but actually that's not the case. Like it's probably other people with their perspective and their experiences are going to take my process and just make it so much better. And that is only going to be helpful and healthy for the business.
I love that. Craig was just asking the term "be a blocker." Is there a book that term came from?
I'm sure at some point, yes, but I've just sort of just used it all the time because I've when I was struggling at some point with the business, someone that I spoke to said, you've effectively become a bottleneck and a blocker for your business, and I've just then started thinking about that term, but maybe they read a book.
I think Clockwork is one of the sort of classic books that I recommend folks to think about when they're thinking about how to stop being the bottleneck and how to get things working on autopilot. And one of the things Mike Michalowicz talks about, I don't know if you're familiar with his book, but this idea of the queen bee role, like what is the one role that you as the CEO should be doing? That is the only thing that you should be doing. So whether that's creating content, whether it's managing people, whatever that is, everything else needs to be getting you out of that and getting your team helping you do that.
Because once you do that, you can free your head from and your mental energy to the tasks that actually add value. You can go from being a statically growing business for 18 months and within a few weeks even of relieving yourself of the mental load of those day-to-day tasks. You can have huge like realizations. Like when I created this documentation, I was able to bring people into the team, and we grew. I think at the time when I brought people into the team were around 15K US a month, and within 6 months that had almost doubled. And it was like, you've got to just take yourself out of the tasks that don't add value so you can think about the bigger picture. And documentation, SOPs, systematizing, scalable, repeatable systems are like critical to that. So,
yeah, and I think once you get to a certain level and you look at that step-by-step task, so you ask yourself, like, is this really $100 task, $1,000 task, a $10,000 task? You can start to break things up and say, like, that task I should not be spending my time on that task. I need to be working on the lead generation or the sales processes or whatever that is. And one quick final question that came in was around how people used Notion in their personal lives. I'm just curious, do you also use it personally? Is there anything specific that you use it for, if you do use it that way?
I have like a kind of to-do list that I work through. It's like my weekly, we have a weekly, we call it a weekly agenda, and it's the core team has a shared task list in Notion where the main thing is really so that as a remote team, we have visibility and can interact with each other, even if we're in different time zones. So like if I need someone to do something or they need to know what I'm working on, they can really see, and I can add stuff to their list very easily. And then I also have a personal version of that, which is my like kind of what do I need to kind of prioritize this week.
Amazing. And have you organized your wedding with Notion? Natasha asks.
No, I did it foolishly with Trello. It was a disaster.
Hilarious. Good question. I think it was Francesco that had like a baby prep Notion board where he was.
Please share it with me.
Yeah, we need to connect you guys.
Away from a baby, so help me.
Oh yeah. I'll tweet at him and connect you both, because I think that was a pretty great session where he shared that. So.
Yeah, that would be amazing.
Amazing. Well, thank you everybody for coming today. I hope this was inspiring. I hope everybody is inspired to at least start the process, start thinking about it. And again, if you want to go deeper, check out Danny's presentation on SOPs. I've linked it below. And yeah, thank you so much for sharing this with us.
Yeah, you're very welcome. And thanks for all the great questions.
Yeah. Have a great weekend, everybody. Bye. For now.